a listener production.
This is the Weekend Briefing, where we move past the headlines and go deeper into the stories and people who are shaping what's next. I'm Antoinette Lattouf. So what do you get when a former primary school teacher turned resilience expert, his musician brother, and a comedian sit down to unpack their feelings, their fears, and their imperfections? Well, you get one of Australia's most popular podcasts. Hugh van Cuylenburg, Josh van Cuylenburg, and Ryan Shelton are the voices behind The Imperfects, a wildly successful podcast now in its 7th season and now with the listener family. And this time, I got to turn the tables on them. Picture this. 3 blokes lined up across from me and me fully embracing my inner headmistress. It was a lot of fun. And we covered everything from toxic masculinity to making friends as adults and why, broadly speaking, Americans just aren't great at self-deprecation and vulnerability like us Aussies are. And later it is the weekend list where producer Helen Smith and I give you our top picks for what to watch, see, do, eat and listen to. There are some killer recommendations coming your way. But first, here's my chat with 3 blokes, all with 4-letter names from The Imperfects. Hugh, Josh and Ryan, welcome to the Weekend Briefing.
Thanks, Antoinette.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
This is actually new for me. I don't usually interview 3 people at once for the Weekend Briefing. So how do you all feel about popping my group interview cherry?
Wow, what an open. Great.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah,
good.
good.
Yeah, very nervous actually.
Yeah, I wasn't, but
Okay.
now I am.
Yes,
A lot of pressure.
Good. It is a safe space though, guys, don't worry. But I want to talk about that phrase, it is a safe space, because I feel like it is used so often that it's no longer a safe space, right? Like when people suggest that every space is a safe space, how safe are we?
It's a good question. I think for us on our show, in our literal space, in our literal podcast space, we do so much work to try and genuinely make it feel very safe for the guests, and that work is done often months and months before the 3 of us even speak to them. In speaking to like Bridge, our producer, or Bella, another producer, it's like so much pre-work, as you would know, like so much pre-work is done to sort of make them feel like this truly is a safe space. We're not, on The Imperfects, we're not trying to get any sound grabs, or we're not trying to exploit the guest in any way. We are genuinely trying to get a story which will hopefully help lots of people, and that's the whole point. And I think the guests hopefully understand that's the point.
I do take your point, though. I think we all know as human beings instinctively or intuitively if a space is safe or not. You just know. I think you just get a feeling. And so I think it's on us to create a space where we will say to them, this is a very safe place, but it's on us to ensure that it is. So when they walk in the room, they definitely feel that.
And Josh, does providing a safe space mean there'll be like complete protection from challenging viewpoints or uncomfortable topics? Or can those 2 things be 2 quite separate ideals?
No, I think they can both live side by side. I think safety is about care and respect. And so, I mean, for other shows probably go in more dangerous places than we do. But as far as vulnerability, we go to pretty raw places for people. And we have people who come on and talk about things that are incredibly personal to them. And I think that is garnered by the fact that the space is respectful. And so safety, I think, is more about care of the person, care of the people involved, and respect to what they're saying, to the person themselves, and giving them an honest, real place to say it. So I think they can live side by side.
And ultimately it is like, and we tell them this, and this is like our golden rule, ultimately every episode is the guest's episode. We're just sort of helping them guide them through it, basically. So they get final cut, they get to take out whatever they want if they want.
Yeah.
One of the things that's made, I think, The Imperfects so popular is that it is a space for people to be vulnerable and for the 3 of you also to share your imperfections. So I'd like you to all answer this question at once, if you don't mind. Who is the most imperfect of the trio?
Oh, it's not me, so it must be. Must be
I feel like it's just definitely me.
Yeah.
I feel like
I think it's you as well.
Finally, something we're going to agree on.
Trust the brother to jump in and be like, yeah, mate, it's you.
Yes.
No, I feel like I've just discovered so much about myself in the last, half a year that I always knew I was very imperfect, but I certainly feel it at the moment with a variety of things, such as a very recent diagnosis of ADHD, which explains a lot to me about myself. I just feel like middle age, I've been shocked by the onslaught of heavy emotions in middle age has brought. I kind of had this picture that once I had kids and enjoyed my job, that everything would just be much easier, but I've actually found things get harder and harder, which was probably naive to think that having kids would make things easier, but it's just, I certainly feel very imperfect at the moment.
I love that for you, Hugh.
Thank you.
It's great for us.
Great for content.
It's obviously season 7. You've just joined the listener family, so welcome. What are you hoping to do this season to keep things fresh and I guess keep sharing, but ensuring that it's, still empowering and self-deprecating? Because I guess there's a bit of a balancing act, particularly for Australian audiences, where we like people to be self-deprecating, we like to learn things, but we don't like it to be too preachy. What can we expect from this season?
I think we're kind of naturally self-deprecating, so I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But luckily, I was going to say luckily, but it's kind of sad as well. There's no shortage of people with imperfections and people who are going through a lot and achieving things. So there's never a shortage of incredible people to speak to. And the wonderful thing about sharing so many different stories is that one week a story might not resonate for you, but then the next week another story will be exactly the story you need to hear. So I hope to continue to get incredible people coming on the show, telling stories that resonate with people and help people around Australia and the world.
Great answer.
Ryan, do you reckon the Imperfects would take off in a place like the United States where, people are far more likely to be, and I am generalising, far more likely to be boastful and obnoxious and less open about their imperfections?
It'd be good if you could actually tell us what you really think, Antoinette, at some point. But considering you're keeping your cards close to your chest on that, I will. I don't know. It's sort of hard to tell, isn't it? I guess generally it's such a big country, obviously, and there's so many different people like Australia. But I guess we're all humans and we're all imperfect in the same ways. Ultimately, I think what we've always tried to do is talk about topics which are maybe traditionally maybe taboo in some circles or hard to talk about for some people, and we try and make them accessible by adding humour or different ideas and approaches which will make these topics which we all deal with much more accessible to more people. So it would be great if it worked in America the same way it'd be great if it worked in Jamaica or anywhere, anywhere that has humans.
But I would say, if my resilience project talks anything to go by, it wouldn't work in the United States.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Why is that?
I did.
Why is that?
I got flown over there to speak to, I think it was 7 college sports programs in 9 days. And no, it's the other way around. It was 9 college sports programs in 7 days.
Important detail.
Yep. And and I've never seen a more confused, perplexed audience of, in fact, because I was doing the whole starting off being Australian, self-deprecating and being very humble.
Yeah.
And I was about 10 minutes in. I was telling stories that I had told quite a few times before about my failures and stuff-ups. And it was an American football team, college team, a very big one, was Michigan. And a guy stood up and goes, "Come on, man, believe in yourself. You can do this." and then the guy who got me out there, he was realising it just wasn't working. So he jumped up and said, "Why don't you tell them about how you've built your business from nothing to what it is now?" And I went, I'm not ready to tell that story. I'll keep going with the talk I was doing. And at the end, they all had advice for me about how I could become more confident and how I should so it was, I
have
would
to tweak it a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, that is hilarious. And that makes me less uncomfortable about the very judgmental question I just put to you.
No, because I've experienced it.
Well, I remember
Exactly.
hearing there was a comedian who was launching a show and doing press for a TV show in the States, and he was meeting with different local newspapers in the States, launching his Australian show. And one of the questions was, so tell me about the new show. And he said something along the lines of, it's just it's a little show about, based on my life and in a little town. And there's some funny bits and blah, blah, blah. Talking like you would normally talk as an Australian. And the reporter was so confused. The reporter was like, so hang on, is it a good show or is it not a good show?
Oh my God.
Was so used to people saying it's the hottest new comedy coming out of Australia. We would never say that, but that is sort of maybe what they respond to.
And Hugh, as a former primary school teacher, I'm keen to talk to you about resilience and I guess what you've learned in the classroom that adults can learn from. There does seem to be a bit of a view that, in our day we were more resilient and we just figured, we fended for ourselves and we went out in the morning and we came back when the sun set, and kids aren't resilient in a way that we were. They're too reliant on YouTube and whatever. Are there things from children that adults can learn about resilience? Because I feel there's so much talk about how children are not resilient and it was so much better in our day. And so I'm keen for your perspective, both as a parent, a primary school teacher, and somebody with resilience expertise, although you're working on your confidence in that area. I know that's a work in progress.
That's such a good question that I'm really glad I'm not answering.
It's funny because when we first had kids, people was always asking me, what do you want most for your kids? And I kept saying, for the first 6 months I was saying I want them to be happy. And I kind of realised after 6 months that's such an unrealistic expectation for them to put on. They're always going to be happy because they're just not. And then I realised very quickly what I want for them more than anything is for them to be resilient. So when something goes wrong, they know how to work their way through whatever. It's not a matter of if something goes wrong, it's when something goes wrong. But for what we can learn from kids, I think kids are so our program is teaching resilience every single day in schools all across the country. And what I love seeing is how open they are to ways that I feel like as adults we can be a little bit more, I'm right, and we're not as open to advice on how we could potentially become more resilient or open to growth a lot of the time, because we have this view that back in the day it was just you would fall over, cut your knee and get up and sort it out yourself. But kids are so open to the stuff that it always amazes me. We're at a school in the Northern Territory last year, a school that a very low socioeconomic area, and I was watching the assistant principal teach these kids the Resilience Project curriculum, and they had to write down what is something really difficult you've been through in life and what have you learnt from it. And I watched them answer the question so vulnerably and share so vulnerably. And because of that, the connection between this class, you could tell it was a very strong connection, but it was because they were so naturally vulnerable and so open to vulnerability. And I remember sitting there thinking, gosh, if we were like that as adults, I think we would generally as a community be much more connected and much more supportive of each other, because these kids were taking in turns to offer up the fact that they weren't okay in certain parts of their lives. And when you do that, when you put your hand up and say, I'm struggling, you send a message to the universe that I can't do this by myself and I need support. And I, from the kids we work with, it seems to be that they are naturally better at that than we are as adults.
I mean, I don't have kids, but I have seen heaps of them over the years. And the one thing I do...
Same thing.
Same thing, yeah, I imagine. Learnt the same lessons, same struggles. But I imagine, the thing that I've noticed from kids is, and you kind of remember this as being a kid yourself, is that kids just seem way more present than we are. They're so in the moment because it's just come so naturally to them. And I guess as we get older, we spend so much less time thinking about the present moment and obviously think way more about the past and the future and the anxiety that comes from all that. So to live with the presence of a child would be heaven. I would love that.
Josh, I'm not sure if you have kids.
I do. I've got 2 kids, two and a half and 5.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if you don't, you can pass on your observations from children you've seen in college, like Ryan just did. Is there anything that children teach you about resilience?
About resilience? The presence answer is a great one.
It's already taken.
Yeah. I'm kind of in awe of them in their ability to try new challenging things and push through things. I think as an adult, I got a bit stuck at some point of thinking this is who I am and I can't try new things, and my resilience, therefore, to as soon as I tried something and it didn't go well, I would think you're a failure, you failed, and start catastrophizing. I can't say the word.
Keep trying.
Yeah. No, catastrophizing.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's it. Yep.
Just sounded wrong out of my mouth.
And just from a brand point of view, Antoinette, if we can keep all of those mistakes in, that would be great.
Yes,
Thanks.
absolutely will.
Yeah. However, I look at the way my oldest boy, Charlie, is going in his first year of 4-year-old kinder, and the risks he's taking every day to start socialising with kids, to invite a kid to his party, all this stuff. The taking risks that he has and the resilience he has, even when it doesn't go well, to turn back up the next day and do it again, I am so in awe of, and I'm learning from every day.
Hugh, you mentioned the vulnerability shown in that Northern Territory classroom and how that was really powerful. I wonder how hard it is, and perhaps you can provide some insights, how hard it is to be vulnerable and communicate that vulnerability when you come from a demographic that historically hasn't been oppressed, has the most power, and society, again, is telling you all the time, you're privileged, you have the power, we don't really care what you think. How difficult is it to be a straight white man and share vulnerability in an ecosystem that perhaps doesn't really want to take it in at this moment in history?
I think we are so vastly aware of the fact that we as white middle-aged men, I don't think you're middle-aged yet, Josh, also, by the way. I was thinking this yesterday.
Close.
You're close.
When is middle-aged, by the way? Because I keep bumping it up the closer I get to it.
42 for me, I feel like. If I reach 84, I think, that's kind of...
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
anyway,
cool.
To give me some thinking time. We are so vastly aware that we need to do more listening than talking.
No, I don't necessarily think that's true, and that's not necessarily what I was asking, because I think that there is vulnerability and there needs to be, in order to challenge that toxic masculinity, vulnerability needs to be part of that. And I guess this is not to criticise who you are.
I know.
It's more about understanding that balancing act between, well, we need to provide this space, but how hard is it to step into this space?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, again, we're so vastly aware of how we need to listen more. So when we do then share stories, it feels vulnerable because every time I share a story, there's a part of my brain that says this will help people because they're going through a similar thing and they'll feel seen. But there's a part of me thinking, oh God, I hope this doesn't come across as self-indulgent. It's a fine line the whole time. I've never ever found it hard to be vulnerable. I've always probably overshared stuff in my life that's happening, but I've always done it because I've just felt like it's such a connecting thing to do. It's always felt so connecting, and I do think at this time, as you mentioned, connection has never been so paramount, and so I think that's why we'll continue to do it. But also being aware that of the privileged position that we come from. Yeah.
I grew up in a house where vulnerability was just not a thing. And I think a lot of people would probably relate to that. It was just, it was very much a sweep it under the rug. It's like, you'll be okay, that sort of vibe. And it really wasn't until meeting Hugh and Josh and doing this and being actively vulnerable on the podcast and feeling the effects of how connecting it was, not only to these guys, but to even just strangers listening. And it's kind of weird that, like, before the podcast, I would every now and again get someone who would say that they'd seen me do something on a comedy show of some sort and say, oh, that was really funny. And it was lovely, but it felt very, very different when people would respond so deeply to something that I've shared vulnerably that wasn't funny at all. And that you can just tell the difference in the connection that happens between me and the person who's the listener or the person who's messaged me. It's just a completely different experience, and I think it's meant that people and this includes friends and family. I think because they've heard me be vulnerable on the show, they feel more comfortable to be vulnerable with me, and it just the domino effect of that is pretty special.
Yeah, and I think you're right, whether it was stated or implied in the question that we come from a demographic that's traditionally and stereotypically not great at being vulnerable. But I think that the experience we've had, and that is when it's genuine and you're being genuinely vulnerable and doing it with people who care about you, the progress you get internally for your own mental health and through the connection that you make with the people you do it with is so powerful that it's, although difficult, is I think rewarding for everyone when done right.
It's also actually, now that I think about it, and I do feel this a lot doing the show, sometimes there's sort of a bit of a fine line that I definitely feel when I think, I want to talk about this thing on the Imperfects on the podcast, and it's a vulnerable thing, and I really have to honestly answer the question to myself: am I truly talking about this because I think it will be helpful to someone, or am I doing it because I think it will be good content for the show? And that is a really, really tricky line to straddle sometimes, because we never want to be talking about something that feels not exploitative, I guess, but just like opportunistic or something like that. We're so, I feel like we're so strict, and this goes for the guests we talk to on the podcast. It's like it's got to be coming from the right place, and I think people listening can really tell when it's not. So that's the goal. We don't always get it right, but that's the goal.
There is obviously a lot of vulnerability on the podcast. There's a lot of sharing, trauma, mental health, overcoming adversity. It's often really moving. Do you consider it, though, a fail when the guest doesn't cry?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we tell them. Yeah, we tell them afterwards that it wasn't good enough.
We haven't ever spoken about this, but we have a trapdoor underneath the guest seat, and if it gets to the end of the chat and they haven't cried, they get flushed into a
But conversely, we have a bell outside that we ring as soon as someone starts crying.
Yeah.
We all ring the bell and we all start cheering.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge in the office. Yeah. Like I said, it's got to come from the right place.
There is this mantra that you have that it's, I believe, and tell me if I'm misquoting you, it's a place to talk about your scars and not your wounds. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of we do talk about that sometimes in terms of like whether it's us talking about something or a guest. It can be more.
But how do you tell the difference between a scar and a wound?
It's
tricky.
tricky.
I think that's the skill of a lot of the time our producer, Bridget, who will chat to the guest sometimes multiple times before the interview happens, and she's intuitively very good with that and with people. And I think you can tell when you speak to someone, are they reflecting on something they've learned from, or are they right in the thick of it and really languishing? And I think we don't want to ever put anyone on the mic who is really lost with where they're at in a way that is going to make things more difficult for them. Maybe, for example, their family doesn't know about their struggle and they're going to tell a lot of people about it. It might make things tougher for them when they go home and have to have those conversations with their family. So it's a and Bella as well, our other producer, I think it's a lot of it comes down to their very high emotional intelligence in the conversations they have before we meet them.
I understand that obviously Hugh and Josh, you guys met somewhere in your parents' home many years ago.
Yeah.
But Ryan and Hugh, you met at a cafe and you became friends a few months afterwards, as I understand. I want to talk about adult friendships and forming, but also like the space and the time to form friendships when you kind of have your life together and have your circle of friends together. Very simple question, like taking on new friends. Are you into it, or are you guys at capacity?
As a general rule, I don't really like people.
Is this an
Yeah.
invitation, Antoinette? Because if it's an invitation, then yes, very open. Would love to be friends with you.
Okay, look, to be fair, I've lost a few friends recently, so I have a few vacancies. No, but also I'm at this point in
Check
my
your
life, this is
references.
like seeking advice. This
Yeah.
is, I'm really suspicious, and like I don't know if I can make friends the way I used to.
I was going to say you probably can't. Making friends now is different to the way it used to be, I think, as you enter different stages of life. Like I think about people who I'm starting to become friends with through my kids, and that's a whole new thing of like when they invite someone, like we had a birthday party, my oldest had his 5-year-old birthday party, invited some kids from kinder. I'd never met the parents before, and I was a bit nervous, not only for him but for myself, thinking how are these conversations going to go, who are these people going to be like, and I've loved all of them. And I was so excited because I'm like, now I have a chance to make new friends. But it's completely different to being like 18 and going to the pub and just drinking and, I don't know, going to whatever you do, whatever we did back then to make friends, or at school where you just were forced to spend time with people so you became friends with them. This time it's a whole new thing and I'm a bit nervous about it, but also excited about doing it differently.
Ryan, you strike me as someone who seamlessly makes friends.
Oh, that's really nice to hear. Do you think so? Well, that's good. Well, I hope that is the case. I love making new friends. Like I think there's part of me that sort of unconsciously feels that because at this point in my life, at least, my partner and I have chosen not to try and have kids. And so there's a big part of me that feels like, okay, well, I need to heavily lean on my friends as I age, because that is a big loss that I will have from my life is like an immediate family, which I'm so hyper aware of, and is a really, really, it's a really tricky thing to reckon with. But I am very lucky that I do have lots of great friends in lots of different groups from lots of different places. And I love my friends and I love making new friends so much. It's just so, when you have that spark with someone and and I've just started playing golf and that's a whole new way to hang out with friends and meet people. So I'm well up for it.
Can I ask Ryan a question? I know it's your show, but I have a question to ask.
Go easy on me, mate, please.
I kind of feel like for me, there's like a safety because I can say to the person, should our kids should hang out? And I can like hide behind the kids in becoming friends with someone new.
Isn't there?
Whereas you have like more vulnerability to say, I want to hang out with you.
Well, that's true, except that the kids
excuse.
thing, wouldn't it be like, aren't you kind of, there's a huge unknown there because what if the kids fall in love with each other and then they really want to hang out every day, but you don't like the parents, then you're locked in.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah, I haven't considered that.
So the agency is taken away, whereas I can still, ghost someone if I want.
But I think it's more vulnerable for you to reach out and say, I like you and I want to be friends.
I'll accept that.
Hugh, do you have anything to add?
I would. What has really fascinated me was I'd say Ryan has opened up my world to new friends. Like before I met Ryan, I had school friends, I had cricket friends, and that was it. And I hadn't thought about it ever, but I wasn't really going around making new friends. They were people I was meeting, but they didn't fit into either of those categories. And then when Ryan and I first met, because I went up to him in a cafe to tell him how great I thought he was, and then the friendship started a little while after that. It was about 2 years or 3 years after that, we sort of... and then Ryan very generously we got on so well, and I didn't say this, but Ryan was like, also, I've got all these other friends. If you'd like to be friends with them, like, here are some wonderful people you might like. And then I became friends with them.
He had to audition, but he did really well.
But what I have noticed is the relationships you make, the friendships you have now, that you start now, they're very different to the ones I've had forever. So with my new friends, I'll say I love you very easily, like so quickly at the drop of a hat. Whereas friends from school I've known since we were 12, probably not going to say that ever. I don't know why. It's just not in our dynamic. We would never do that. But with new friends, it's much easier because, I don't know, you just sort of, maybe it's a bit easier to be yourself. I don't really know what it is, but yeah, it's interesting.
Hugh, I think it's also since joining Listener, you've probably got a new friendship group there too.
True.
Your Listener friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly right.
Oh, I love that bit of a cross-promo plug. But look, I'd also like to shift gears abruptly. So thank you for the friendship tips. I want to talk about toxic masculinity. And there are all these, we have to counter it with, healthy masculinity and safe masculinity. And there has been some really great work done in this area. Are any of you concerned that masculinity is about to get more toxic and emboldened with a Trump presidency and a potential Dutton government?
Buzz not.
I am, but only because I feel like everything's getting more extreme. Everything's getting pushed further either side. And it's just, and if you're in the middle, then you're being weak or you're not. It's just, to me, I kind of blame social media really, but I feel like everyone's getting pushed to either side and you can't think something's, it's fine. You have to love it or hate it. And I think it's a real problem. And yes, to answer the question, yes, I do feel like there is that. But I also, there are also wonderful examples on the topic of toxic masculinity, there are wonderful examples of people like Harry Garside, for example, who on our podcast talked about, he was just so comfortable being himself and the way he spoke about, wearing a dress because he felt like it and painting his nails because that's what he felt like doing. There are incredible role models out there for young men who are showing a different pathway.
Yeah.
And that's the end of my answer.
Well, no,
it's a beautiful answer.
I think that's a great answer.
Yeah.
I think to point that out, that is, it's not necessarily something that we actively try and tackle the toxic masculinity issue, but I certainly feel I get a very warm feeling if I ever get a message from someone who, sometimes, it's really nice, but we'll get really long messages from people who've heard an episode or listened to the podcast and they're very vulnerable and long and explaining a struggle they're going through. And every now and again, I'll read one of these messages and then go into their profile to see who they are on Instagram, and it'll be like a 22-year-old tradie, drinking a chocolate milk, and it's like I would never have guessed if I just looked at that guy. I would judge that person as someone who would firstly never listen to our podcast, but also would never share what they've just shared, and I think that makes me feel really, really good. We just happen to be three guys, so whether or not that makes it easier for him to listen to or to connect with, I'm not sure, but that gives me a really, really good feeling.
I think there's also not just us, but more so some of the guests, as Hugh said, Harry Garside being one of them, but many men that we've had on. Pat Cummins is another one that comes to mind, who are extremely successful in what they do. And what you would define as, I don't know what the right, catchy phrase would be, but they're certainly on the far opposite spectrum of toxic masculinity. And I'm really proud to be part of a show that exposes those stories and provides men out there and young men especially an example of something that you can be, because that old sort of cliche that you can't be what you can't see, I think is very true. And there are so many loud, poor examples of male behaviour that catch headlines and are very juicy to put on a headline and things go viral. So I think it's really important to display and show examples of the opposite, and I'm really proud to be part of a show that does that.
I love that, and I can't wait to follow season 7. But before I let you go, what's one thing you've learnt from a co-host, one of your co-hosts? And, there are no wrong answers.
Oh, God, that we've learnt from each other.
Yeah. I mean, you could share something you've learnt from me, but we haven't known each other that long yet, Ryan.
Can I go first? I said this to you guys the other day, but doing this show, and it's not just you two, it's everyone in the team, but has made me feel like I wasn't enough to I am enough as a person. And I've learnt that from you two and everyone in the team. But that's been a huge change for me.
Really good answer. It's annoying you went first.
Sorry.
Other than Mr. and Mrs. Van Cuylenburg are excellent parents.
I learnt a lot. We did a live tour last year and we're doing another one this year, which we're very excited about. But actually spending time with the team before and after shows, even during the show, I just learnt so much about, I guess, the different approaches we took to performing on stage, because it's not really like a episode of the podcast. It's very, very different. There's a lot of performative stuff in there, but we all played very different roles, and watching how each and every one of us sort of got ready for that. It was a lot about professionalism and preparation which I thought was it was very helpful to understand.
I have got one, and I don't know if I've ever told you this, Hugh, but I think the thing that I learnt from you is that there exists people in the world and in the media who are teaching people about vulnerability and about gratitude and empathy and essentially mental health generally. There can be that you can be that person while also being like a normal person who I would want to hang out with. I think before I met Hugh, my general perception was that there were like these sort of guru type figures who didn't seem like normal people. You know, they seemed like sort of untouchable or unrelatable in a way.
Bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, and just not someone that would be my friend. And so I think like meeting Hugh, I was like, oh yeah, you can be both. You can talk about that stuff, but then you can also laugh about the same things that I laugh about, and both things can be true in the same person. I think that was it was actually probably a big part of the reason why I felt safe and comfortable doing the podcast in the first place. Because my initial fears were like, people are going to think I'm taking myself too seriously. People are going to think I'm indulgent or whatever. But seeing Hugh do what he did, like for the Resilience Project and the talks that he would give, that showed me, I was like, oh, you can do both. You can do both.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that. And honestly, the three of you, you've passed the test. We can be friends.
Oh, yes. Great.
God, I've never had a friendship audition like this, but it was worth it.
That's why you're sitting on the table like that in a row. You've all passed with flying colours. It has been so wonderful getting to know you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
Antoinette.
Thank you.
That was Hugh and Josh van Cuylenburg and Ryan Shelton from the Imperfects. You've been waiting for it all week, and now it is here. It's time for the weekend list. That is where we guide you on what to read, watch, listen, cook, see, do, and everything in between. Helen Smith, what are your recommendations?
My first recommendation is a TV show on SBS, and it's called Pose. Now, it's not new. It's been out since 2018, but I hadn't really come across it. So it's 3 seasons of it. I've pretty much finished the first season. And it's amazing. It's about the ball scene in New York City. So it's set in around
As in ballroom dancing?
No.
Oh, no, just balls.
Balls. So they're balls for like queer communities, LGBTQI plus communities as well. And this is set in 1987 to 1998. And it's in New York.
Okay, that time frame is wild. So I'm imagining it's not a reality TV show.
No.
So it's like, is it a docuseries or a dramatization? Or
So it's a drama. So pretty much this is what the bio, I guess, says. While New York witnesses the evolution of the ball culture and the rise of the Trump era, an LGBTQI plus ball fixture, Blanca, who is the main character, starts her own house. So a house is pretty much the house mothers. They bring in everyone from the streets. So a lot of, in this time, it follows HIV, the rise and it's really sad in that aspect. But it's inside a world that most people
I didn't even know existed.
Would not know existed. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's really massive. Like a lot of trans people, a lot of queer people, how they were just thrown out to the gutters, thrown out of society. And this ball culture of voguing, posing really is their home, their community. And it's amazing. It is such a good show. So many actresses in it that are trans, that are queer, that are represented on screen as well. And it's African-American, Latino communities in particular. It's amazing. It's such a good show. SBS On Demand, Pose.
Okay.
And 3 seasons that you can just binge and go for it.
Perfect. And in the lead up to Mardi Gras, this is something good to watch as well.
That is good. I didn't even...
Okay, so I have something also for viewing, and I don't often read reviews or like sort of like TV critics or film critics, because I find that their job is to be critical and they're more critical than the regular person. But when a film critic gives it 5 out of 5, then I'm like, oh, I give it 5 out of 5 too. And The Guardian has called this show one of the most hilarious, heart-wrenching shows on TV. It is Mo on Netflix. It's season 2. So Mo is a Palestinian-American comedian, and he has kind of taken some of his stand-up, and it's like a drama show about him and his supposed life with his mother and his Latina girlfriend. And he has no residency status because he is without papers. He's a stateless person living in the United States. And in season 2, in a desperate attempt for Mo to get some sort of papers, like, he ends up in Mexico. So he ends up a stateless Palestinian American over the border in Mexico trying to smuggle himself back in to the United States. So it's like horribly dark humour, but really, really beautifully done. And it is created, as I said, by the comedian Mo Amer. And the series explores like cultural identity, family dynamics, relationships, the immigrant experience, but just being like hilarious, like stupidly hilarious. Like a stateless Palestinian ends up with Mexicans trying to smuggle himself into
what are the odds?
Smuggle himself into, like, it's horrible dark humour, but also fantastic dark humour. What I found really special about season 2 in particular, which dropped just recently, is that it also is kind of unabashedly jumping into Middle Eastern politics in a way that I was surprised Netflix would commission.
Right.
Because it looks at colonialism and the daily oppression of Palestinians in the West Bank, and you see Mo's mother on her phone watching clips on social media crying about the atrocities unfolding, which so many of us around the world are doing. We're looking at the atrocities going, how is this happening?
Yeah.
But you're seeing it happen, and then there's, 30 seconds later something that's hilarious that happens that just makes you laugh. But I just found it so brave, so honest and hilarious. Also in this political climate, for Netflix to put something like this on air, I think is I hate to use the word brave because it shouldn't be brave.
Yeah.
But it surprised me. So Mo on Netflix, that's M-O, highly recommend.
That sounds great. And sometimes the absurdity of life is where the best comedy comes from.
Absolutely.
Because it's just like, what's going on?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think Pose as well, the show that I just recommended, does that really well as well, because it's quite dark. Some of the themes of HIV and people passing away, like left, right and centre. But then they find these moments of gold and these moments of kind of hope within all of that it really is beautiful.
Oh, I love that.
But my next recommendation is line dancing. So cowboy line dancing.
Are you doing that?
Yes.
Okay.
It is so much fun. I feel like it's really popped up in Australia recently, and a lot of bars and pubs.
Is it an American type thing, line
dancing?
dancing?
It's an American thing, like the cowboys, like
Yeah.
line dancing, and you got your cowboy boots on. And the queer community over in LA, it's huge over there, and it's kind of trickled into Australia. And so it's not your typical cowboys, like, line dancing stuff. It's inner West, like inner West Sydney, if you know that's a really funky vibe. Think Fitzroy in Melbourne, that kind of vibe. And everyone's just line dancing, and it's so much fun. It's so silly.
You go to lessons?
You go to like a pub, and then someone will lead it. So it's kind of like bingo. You go to the pub, someone's doing bingo, but it's line dancing at a venue, at like the pub or a dance club, whatever. And someone's just teaching you how to line dance, and it's so much fun, and it's so silly, and everyone is just kind of in the same boat, just learning how to do it. And yeah, I love it. Recommend line dancing. If you have a Google, see if there's any local places that are doing a line dancing night.
Okay, so what's really interesting is it's not organised weekly dance sessions that you pay for.
No.
It's more at a kind of event at a pub like bingo, and you just participate. Do you have to pay a fee, or you just...
It depends. Some of them, like I'm going to one next week that's $20, and but some of them are free events that are just part of kind of, every week at the pub you have your steak night, or you have bingo night or trivia night. Same thing. You have line dancing night.
I love how enthusiastic you are and how much you're smiling about it.
So good.
I am not going to say I will try it, but I love this for you.
I think I'd get you. I don't know. Give me a few weeks.
Okay, so my final recommendation is the latest book from Liane Moriarty. It's called Here One Moment. I have read all 10 of Liane Moriarty's books. This particular book follows a group of people on a plane from Hobart to Sydney, and then there's a psychic who boards the plane, and in the middle of the flight, to everyone's surprise, she starts going up to people and predicting the cause of their death and their age. So she'll just go up to someone and be like, 27 heart failure or whatever it is. And the people, anyway, so no one really takes her all that seriously until, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, I'll just say shit starts happening. I enjoy Liane Moriarty's books.
Yeah, really good.
Because I think she writes really well. It's good escapism. I know people sometimes just go, oh, it's just chick lit. But I'm like, well, it's chick lit with flair and written with great characters and I enjoy it. I love the concept of this book. The magic sort of fizzled out towards the end, but it was intriguing. And for those who may not know the name, Liane Moriarty, you probably heard of. She's a New York Times bestseller. She's an Aussie. She's written Big Little Lies, The Husband's Secret, Nine Perfect Strangers. So a couple of her books have turned into
amazing
streaming
series.
And I don't know if the reason I didn't like this book as much is I've got to tell you a little story because I have a bit of like ego recovery from being at a writers' festival with Liane Moriarty, right? So my first writers' festival was Sydney Writers' Festival when I published my one and only book.
Yeah.
She's written 10. And when it comes to book signings, they generally do it in alphabetical order. Well, they did at this particular festival. And because I'm Lattouf and she's Moriarty, she was in the line next to me. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people waiting for her to sign her book. There were 8 people in my line, half of which I was related to.
Oh.
So I had to eat the largest slice of humble pie, my first book signing ever, and I just so happened to be sitting next to the
legend,
Liane Moriarty. So I feel that every time I read her book, I'm like, well, it's good, but it's not that good. But it really is good. So I just thought I would share that with you. But it is a fascinating read. Liane Moriarty, Here One Moment, highly recommend. That's it for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in and being with us. It is always a pleasure. If you want more of the Weekend Briefing, you can find us on the Listener app. You can download the Listener app. Follow us there. Otherwise, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. We'll be back on Monday morning. The team will have the latest headlines straight to your headphones along with some interesting interviews. Stay safe, everyone. I'll catch you next week.
Listener.